laying in that bunk and looking out the window on the big barbed wire, thinking, I was never shaking my fist at God, but I did think, are you sure you're in control? Because it doesn't quite feel like it.
Welcome to the Focus on the Family broadcast, helping families thrive.
Welcome back to Focus on the Family.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's been a while. You finally decided to put this down in a book. It's a powerful story. We're going to get more into that detail, but let's start by letting the listeners hear more about who you are, where you're coming from, the type of people you were back then, and then we'll get into the trouble that you found yourself in. Tell us about your families and what it was like for each of you growing up. Let's start with Gary. Why don't we start there? Gary, what kind of family did you come from?
I grew up in a really great family. I have an older brother, 2 younger sisters, and terrific parents. I remember my mom making these great meals every night, and we were just close. I grew up in Denver and graduated from South High School and then went to the University of Colorado. And I always loved music. So when I was in, right after high school, I joined a singing group called the Folks About Town. And I sang in this group for a long time, and Bo and I actually met through that group.
What were your growing up years like, and who are you, and what kind of family are you coming from?
Let's see. My dad, Dale Mitchell, was a great Major League Baseball player in the 40s and 50s. Had 9.5 seasons where he hit .312 for the Cleveland Indians and then was traded to the Dodgers. But
you were how old when he was playing the big leagues?
7 years old when he quit. So my earliest years were spent just kind of tending ball games, going back and forth from Cleveland to Oklahoma City where we lived. But because of my dad's fame as an athlete, sports was the major theme in our home. Now, my mom was a two-fisted, loving Christian, so I was getting that at the same time I was getting the message from my father. If you hit 450, son, that's good. If you hit 200, that's not good, not acceptable.
So really performance-based.
Absolutely.
But his life was that way, too. That's what he lived by.
Yes, and it didn't bother me, but it was very competitive and pretty intense. We had alcohol issues with my dad from the time I think I first can remember. It was never knowing for sure you're going to get stroked or swatted as a kid because what kind of mood was dad in. And he was a great guy, funny, obviously great success in business after his baseball career because of his competitiveness, but tough. So.
You know, let me ask you, because not many children have the experience of growing up in a professional athlete's home, whether it's football, baseball, basketball, whatever it might be. And our culture lifts up the sporting world so profoundly. I mean, it's kind of like back in the gladiator days of Rome. I mean, they get away with things that most people don't get away with. They are on a platform and command the attention of the media in ways that normal people don't. What was that like being a 5, 6, 7-year-old going to the Cleveland Stadium and probably doing some road games? What was that? Was it heady? Did you understand at 7 years old that, hey, my he's pretty much the stuff?
Yes and no. I mean, on one hand, he was just dad. On the other hand, especially in the 40s and 50s, if you think about it, the NFL was just starting to grow in its popularity. The PGA Tour was really about the same state. Arnold Palmer hadn't yet lifted it to where it is today. NBA, not much. So if you were a Major League Baseball star, you were one of the most famous athletes in the world, and that's what my dad was. But I was always just proud of it. I always had this feeling that more was expected of me because of who he was, but that didn't bother me either. I just thought by the 5th grade on, you know, this is fun, yes, but it's more fun to win. It's more fun to clobber these people we're playing. It's more fun to score 20 points than not score any points in basketball or hit a home run than strike out. So none of that bothered me, but I was just proud of my dad.
You had an experience, I think in the World Series, your dad did, but it affected you and your mom and your family when he was pitching, or when he was part of a World Series. Describe that whole event, because I think it brings all of us a little closer to who you are and who your dad was.
Hey, I was sitting in the stands with my mom. That's what you're referring to, Jim, at the 1956 World Series on October 8th. It was the fifth game of the series, Yankees against the Dodgers. And I got to go to the World Series that year because my big brother, Dale Jr., had gone in 1954 when the Indians got clobbered by the Giants. But on that day in 1956, the Yankee pitcher Don Larson was mowing down the Dodgers, and pretty soon the word spread nationwide, and millions of people were tuned in to what turned out to be the only perfect game ever pitched in World Series history. So a no-hitter's good, means nobody gets a hit for the opposing team. A perfect game means nobody reaches base. No walks, no errors, nothing. 26 up, 26 down, and the last batter the Dodgers called to the plate was my father, Dale Mitchell. And, of course, not wanting to disappoint the whole world, my dad struck out, ended the game, and that thrust me into therapy for the rest of my life.
Well, I mean, it's an incredible story, but it just paints that picture. Describe for us how you two met and how the Lord brought together these colliding forces in Bo and Gary.
Well, first of all, I always loved sports growing up, so we had that in common. And we had some other issues. I had a few alcohol problems in my family, too. I came to Christ through Young Life when I was 19, and he came to Christ when he was 15 with Young Life. So we had a lot of things in common when we met. And then he had a roommate, Tim Evans, who was a good friend of mine up in Boulder. And so Tim Evans said, hey, I've got this friend of mine who's singing in this nightclub with these two guys in Denver. Would you like to come down? So he came down with this group, and he walked in, and I thought, he's pretty cute. But then
You thought I was extremely squirrely.
I did a little bit, but
I love the but then comment.
yes, but then yes.
He was really cute, but then
there's
Yes, but
more.
then-
fill that blank in
yes,
for
but
us.
then. So, but he was his normal, just outgoing, fun, really cute, 6'3", he's blonde, he's handsome, blue eyes. I mean, I just thought this is a pretty cool guy. And I was going to school at the time. The three of us were going to school at the time. And so I was kind of done with that. And then we started dating in a couple weeks.
I thought it was 2 nights later, actually, and we got engaged in 3 weeks. So I
That's
view it
true.
as a God deal that we just talked all the time. So I was in the middle of basketball, baseball preparation at CU, and I said to my friend Tim Evans, wait a minute, this beautiful girl is a friend of your family's, and you've never taken her on a date. He's like, no, you think she's cute? And I said, it doesn't matter anymore. You're out of the picture because I'm taking
You cut the
her out.
conversation off.
I really, it was just a God deal. He put us together, and our faith was at the point where we knew the Lord was
And
bringing us together.
And you were in sports. You were trying to get on with a professional baseball team. You played in the minor leagues, and you came up. Did you come up for a season or two with the major leagues?
Just missed it. No, I never got out of A-ball. I was phenomenal in high school, good in college, and really sorry in the pros.
Well, that's a lot of good athletes
Yeah.
follow that same path. Let's move into what you did get into, and that's the business world and real estate. And you were thriving in that area, doing pretty well. Take us to the story that is the story, Grace Behind Bars, the title of your book, that begins to peel back everything about who you are. What kind of business guy were you? I'm assuming at that point you're pursuing the Lord. You have a relationship with God. I don't know what that was like. You could describe it for us. But you were an honest person, right?
Oh, yeah. And Gary and I were very involved in ministry. We had been on the Young Life Committee there in Boulder. In our first years of marriage, we did Christian marriage encounter retreats where we would teach together. And 1982, Jim Dixon, Jim and Barb Dixon, Bob and Allison Belts, and Gary and I started Cherry Hills Community Church in Denver.
Which is a huge church today. I mean, that's big.
Yeah, 10,000 plus probably now members, but we were just kind of doing what we thought was obedient. Now, unfortunately took the same competitiveness I'd learned from my dad in sports into the business world and into ministry. So it was always a little bit fire-ready aim for me, just too quick on everything, frankly. And I thought there was some kind of something to be gained by thinking that quickly and responding to things that quickly. So business, I was never a big-time real estate developer, but I was doing well, making a lot of money, and we would still see that, you know, all our heads needed to be in the game in terms of business. Our hearts were in ministry. So the very start of this story, Grace Behind Bars, happened in 1984 when Cherry Hills built a new building, and some of the guys that had helped me to sign personal guarantees to build the church asked me 35 days later if I would borrow money to help them with some of their cash flow problems in business.
So these are guys in the church.
Yep, in the church, good friends, and I view them still today as good people that maybe made some mistakes, but hey, don't we all?
We're covering their memoir, really their biography, Grace Behind Bars, and we're about to crack that story open. And before we move there, though, a part of the story, Bo, is Gary, you as Bo's wife, what kind of man is he at this point? What are you seeing? What kind of father was he to the kids?
He was a great dad. He's always been a great dad. And he was very involved with business. I think he was working, I don't know, Bo, like 20 hours a week getting Cherry Hills started for about 5 years.
On top of the regular job?
On top of the regular jobs. And he was going to seminary at the time, getting his degree. I always think that Bo can do like 3 jobs in the time most people can do 1 job. So I would just tag along. And so anyway, when you say that, I just want everyone to know what a great person he is.
Okay, now let's move to the story, Bo. There you are, a good guy, responsive to all, trying to be a good Christian man by being there for your friends. This money has been requested by the community of believers to help build the church. 2 of these guys put in some money. You feel, I'm sure, a bit obligated because you're one of the founding members of the church. They then come back to you 35 days later and say, Bo, we kind of need your help too. Would you be able to do some loans in our direction for some business purposes? Take it from there. What happens?
Gary and I are comfortable saying that I felt in borrowing this money to help these friends, I was doing something heroic and noble. The banker who asked me, would I help them, was also a good friend, also part of our Bible study groups in our church. And the whole meeting took about 10 minutes. So what was wrong with me in those days is too fast, not enough checks and balances, too confident everything I touched was going to work out, too loud, too aggressive, too much ego, too much pride. If we want to start a church, we buy a building, we open the doors, and everybody comes. Why wouldn't they? If we want to start a television program to talk about Christ, we walk into Channel 4, we present it to them, and they say, sure, when do you want to start? And I said, I don't even know what I'm talking about. But
so really trusting, too. That's a key factor here. You had a trusting attitude toward those around you.
I did, and yeah. And I love those guys, and I felt what I did was noble and heroic, and did the paperwork properly.
So how much did you borrow?
$200,000.
And you, in essence, you borrowed this money to give to these other people to invest in other things that you weren't quite clear on.
No, I knew that their company they had just purchased, the big company in Denver, was having cash flow problems, and I know this was to fund 1 month of cash flow problems they were having. But I was happy to do it, and they signed notes back to me, and the money was repaid in a orderly fashion.
Timely way. I mean, you met those obligations.
Yes.
Did the money you repaid come from them or from you?
Came from them. From them back to me.
And you paid it off.
Yeah.
So everything seemed right. And then what happened? Who contacted you with some concerns?
7 years later, the FBI asked if they could have an appointment with me. Well, we'd never had anything in our life worse than a traffic ticket. So why wouldn't I talk to the FBI? So I met with this guy, which I shouldn't have, and he asked me to put a wire on and go to these same friends, a few of which had filed bankruptcy by then and had really struggled financially because in the 80s, the S&L crisis and the real estate collapse caused some damage. And this FBI agent didn't like it when I smiled and said, sorry, but I'm now a team chaplain for the Denver Nuggets, I'm associate pastor of a church. I'm not going to put a wire on and get these people to incriminate themselves. I said, I'll tell you the truth, but I'm not stretching a story to help you nail these guys for something you think was criminal.
So he was asking you basically to go undercover and do some spying on your friends.
Yeah, that's what it felt like to me.
Well, we want to say, we want to respect law enforcement, obviously. And sometimes some things go awry. They're trying to do a job. We have many friends in the FBI that support Focus on the Family, and they're good people. So I want to make sure we get that disclaimer in there. But sometimes law enforcement can get really aggressive in their duty. And this
sometimes
might be,
they cross the line when this guy looked at me and said, well, in that case, we're going to fry your rear end.
that's what he said to you.
Yeah, and I said, can you talk to people that way? And he said, I can, I do, and I will follow through.
And what happened? I mean, there you are, kind of being in the vernacular of that underworld. I mean, you're being strung out there, right? You don't
Yeah.
have many good choices.
Correct. And Gary used the word terrorized. We felt terrorized for about the next 6 months, wouldn't you say?
Yes, we definitely felt terrorized. I remember when Bo came home after the first meeting in August, and he said, "This is the phone call I got," and I went and had this meeting, and he's like, "I've never been a part of anything like this." We didn't know anyone that had gone to prison. We didn't know anybody that had been in a criminal thing.
This wasn't your world.
This was not our world. It was just something. It was so foreign to us. And also with this loan that Bo did with these friends, this was the only business deal he ever did with them.
How does this continue to unwind then, Bo? What are the next steps that law enforcement now takes, or the FBI, to shore up their case? And they're obviously going after somebody in this.
Yes, and they said I was not a target, and I got an attorney involved from our church, and he kind of thought it was all a joke, that...
The attorney.
Yeah, I'm not sure he spent much time reading the documents. And even at some point, Chuck Colson, who had become a casual friend through a mutual friend in Denver, but he said to me, plea bargaining is a tough thing, be careful. But he said, you ought to pray there's something you did wrong technically. You ought to plead guilty. So you can just sign your name and move on with your life.
Now, this is Chuck Colson, the man who went to prison for Watergate.
Yes.
And became a wonderful Christian leader and built Prison Fellowship. But you would take his advice pretty seriously.
Yes, and a couple law firms that were advising me that just said, look, these people are tough to deal with. They normally, like you said, Jim, they normally are dealing with criminals. But anyway, having been promised probation, what it felt like is the government was on a shopping spree through my life, just looking for anything I'd done. I likened it to, this would be like the motor vehicle division calling you and saying, we have you on video for the last 20 years, and we think there's a couple of moving violations in there over the last 20 years. That's what it felt like. They're shopping for something I did wrong. And finally, these loans you mentioned, they said this is called straw borrowing. If you borrow money for a third party knowing that they can't borrow anymore from a bank, in other words, you're kind of a middleman,
Right.
That is written in a federal statute and is a felony. And I said, well, I've never heard the term. Doesn't it matter that the money was repaid? They said, no, technically you did that. And
that's the irony in this whole story, is that everything on the outside, meaning the payment of the loan, the repayment of the loan, took place.
well, I got no fine from the judge, so I didn't pay $1 fine. There was no restitution because there wasn't anything owed. But it's just interesting that the statute itself says I coerced, induced, and procured the commission of bank fraud. That's what I ended up pleading guilty to, thinking to save my family and my friends from this terror we were feeling. Plead guilty, sign your name, go on with your life. So with the promise of probation, that's what I did. Everybody seemed to get the message. of this promise of probation, except the judge, he kept referring to general deterrence in this final hearing, where I thought he'd pat me on the back and tell me to keep up the good work. And he said, the least I can do for you is sentence you to 11 months in federal prison.
Yeah, I mean, that had to land like a hammer. You thought you were going to, in essence, get your hand slapped for something you didn't even know was illegal.
Correct.
And now you're a felon.
Yes. Yeah, it was. Had I been told that, it's not the way we would have played out our end of the deal. We'd have fought them and gone to court.
Bo and Gary, man, this is intense. And again, most of us will never have the experience of becoming a felon. And for that reason, we have not covered all that we need to cover. Let's come back next time, continue the story, and hear more about how God brought you through the gutter in order to teach you how to be more like Him. Can we do it?
We would love to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm John Fuller, and thanks for watching. Get more info about Focus over here and more from our guests over there, and be sure to subscribe to our channel as well.